have breathed your last.
I'm just gonna get this out of the way. I don't like using Saizo in Birthright. In a high recruitment playthrough by an experienced player, outside of a small handful of maps, he'll rarely be anything better than your 4th or 5th best solution to any problem. And the best way to build him is in the most boring way possible, spending nearly all of his time in his base class line. But as much as I don't like using him, I can't deny that he's one of the best units in the game. While he's usually not exceptional, it's rare for there to be a situation where he won't do the job just well enough, thanks to his good stat spread and access to shurikens, which can counterattack at both 1 and 2 range. And he's also extremely reliable thanks to his exceedingly good hit rates. He's just always going to be pretty solid. So joining me today is someone with a self-proclaimed boring and standard playstyle, VeXJL, who is currently in the middle of a conquest playthrough without using pair up in combat. Let's get started. So today we're going to be talking about Saizo. He is pretty much the standard for physical units in Birthright that are not Ryoma. So he's another one of your early recruits being recruited after Chapter 7. Most of your units get recruited around this time, so his availability, like most Birthright units, is very good. So he starts with an interesting starting inventory, a steel shuriken and a brass shuriken. He notably doesn't have the same speed as Kaze, so he'll have a bit more trouble doubling with the steel shuriken, and the brass shuriken is going to end up making him weaker than a similarly or slightly higher leveled Kaze. Not great for a first impression, but his stats are generally pretty solid.
He has good stats, but speed is kind of his weak point, which contrasts very big with Kaze, who is all about that speed.
He does start with C rank shurikens, which Kaze might not have by this point. Kaze starts at D rank, and unless you've been going all out training him during the Branch of Fates and Chapter 7, getting him to C rank shurikens isn't a guarantee by this point, so that is an advantage that Saizo has over Kaze, and it effectively gives him an extra +1 damage against units that he doesn't have weapon triangle disadvantage against, which is pretty good.
It's really nice that the shuriken rank gives attack, and as you said, weapon triangle disadvantage really hurts. Like going up against Oni savages, archers, that kind of deal in early game.
Yeah, Saizo really does not like his joining chapter, which is effectively Chapter 8. A lot of Oni savages that he will be doing basically no damage to and just setting up for kills with shuriken debuffs. It's not great for him.
He does have good matchups against the diviners, but diviners are diviners. They're just weak anyways.
Yeah. The funniest thing I think about Saizo is his tag team bonuses. He gives 3 crit at C, 3 crit at A, and an extra 6 crit at S support. I don't know if anyone has actually used this to any effect, but I just think it's funny.
Yeah, it's like Effie and Leo's. It's all crit. I don't find myself using it, but I guess it could do something, I guess.
Yeah. Birthright is the game that gives you the Great Club, so...
Oh, true.
Crit builds do exist, even if they're not particularly good when you can just be killing all the time if you damage stack. But in Birthright, damage stacking doesn't really exist just because most of the damage stacking skills are Norrigan anyways, so
yeah.
What else are you gonna do?
I do want to say that dodge +5 can probably come in handy. Like in Conquest with Aether, if he gets B support with Effie, he gets 5 dodge. And it's kind of similar to Saizo here. If he gets B support with someone with low luck like Kaze, then it can potentially help.
Although at that point, you probably just want to be pairing up, which already just gives it a nice +5 dodge to begin with, so...
Yeah.
His pair bonuses are kind of meh. He does give 1 speed at B and 1 strength at S, but other than that, it's just luck and skill, which do help, but when you're pairing up, you are probably doing it more to meet benchmarks and not to improve reliability, and Saizo isn't the best at helping you with that.
Yeah, I don't use Saizo for pair up, if at all.
Yeah.
At least not beyond the normal +4 speed from Master Ninja.
Yeah. His bases and growths are very good. I believe he has the highest growths in the game outside of Aptitude, Mozu, and Children, so very impressive.
Yeah, it ties with Asugi. It's really impressive.
Although the big thing that Saizo has over Asugi is that he has better growths in defense, which is the stat that you want to be stacking a lot of in Birthright when you're going to be sending out your ninjas against a group of 6 enemies coming at you in one turn. Saizo's big appeal is just the big defense stat that allows him to stay relevant in Master Ninja when basically every other unit, besides a small handful of them like Silas and maybe Oboro, would rather be in Mechanist over Master Ninja. He has the benefit of getting the extra +5 hits, crit, avoid, and dodge boost that is innate to the Master Ninja class that the other units cannot benefit from if they stay in Mechanist.
Having big defense is just really, really good for Birthright, especially late game. You do face a ton of enemies at once, so the more defense you have, obviously you take a lot less damage.
And another one of Saizo's big appeals is his big skill stats. He starts with a base of 14, which is already pretty good. But on top of that, he has an 80% growth in Ninja, which is kind of insane. It really helps him getting to 100% hits whenever he wants. It does have the unfortunate side effect of increasing your crit rates, which you do not always want, but Saizo's defense is high enough that getting unnecessary crits doesn't always matter.
Yeah, and you can also avoid critting by using brass weapons, flame shuriken, that kind of stuff.
And if you're using a brass shuriken on Saizo, then you will not have any issues at all with hit rates.
Yeah, absolutely. Having high hit is quite nice, especially like in late game. You have like Great Knight, they have like weapon triangle control, and just being able to reach 100% hit rates despite being at weapon triangle disadvantage is very nice. And that's one big pro for Saizo.
And another thing that sets Saizo apart from your other physical units is that he has a magic stat. So he has the option of switching over to the Flame Shuriken to hit the Norians on their lower resistance. Depending on how your growths turn out, his magic stat might actually be the stat you want to use. So having the option to hit resistance on things like Wyvern Lords or Generals can be pretty appealing. Although with armored units, you probably just want to be using the Sting Shuriken to begin with.
I think like his magic in Master Ninja can be like a bit because his base is also not the best, but it needs time to grow basically, or a reclass.
Yeah. If he does go into a magic using class, he can be pretty solid, although he does want to be training up his tome rank pretty early so that he can get to things like the horse spirits or the ox spirits early on. Tome rank is definitely one of the easier weapon ranks to grind up as fast as you can. Just because 1-2 range makes it so easy, especially with a defense stat as high as Saizo's is. He's not gonna have an issue with that.
Absolutely.
Although the one thing that Saizo does have an issue with is his personal skill. One of the worst in the game, it is Pyrotechnics. If a unit's HP is 50% or less and attacks on player phase, he and foes within 2 spaces lose 20% of your HP. So if after an enemy phase, there's just like one unit that you want to pick off, and you're below 50% health, congratulations, you just lost an extra 20% of your health, unless you have a healer kill you beforehand, which you can pretty easily work around it just by not attacking on player phase if your health is below 50%, but this is generally more of a downside than an upside just because most of your combat is going to happen on enemy phase when your enemies are going to be attacking before you unless you have Vantage. So this is generally a net negative once you get past the 20% HP debuff that he inflicts, which generally isn't going to be very impactful.
Pyrotechnics is pretty detrimental, but it can be played around. My favorite way of just playing around it is just healing at the start of player phase, just so that he's healthy.
Yeah.
And if I'm really desperate, it can even go to like Wayne Festal. Even like that little bit of HP that heals can push him above the 50%.
You're like the first person that says using the Wayne Festal as a recommendation just because the physics stabs in Birthright are so bad.
Yeah.
I think it's like 2 base healing plus magic over 3. It's so bad.
You can not believe me, but I've had some good experiences with Wayne Festal. I was using like Great Master's Saizo in one of my runs. And
yeah,
it was so nice in like chapter 24, just being able to heal from the other side of the map.
That is very convenient, although it's more if you forget to stock your units up with concoctions that it becomes more useful.
Yeah.
He does have a good number of classes he can get to through his base class and friendship. Starting off, he has Ninja, which gives him Lock Touch, Poison Strike, Lethality, and Shuriken Fair if he goes the Master Ninja routes, or Golem Bane and Replicate if he goes in the Mechanist routes. And Saizo probably wants to stay in Master Ninja for most of his time in Birthright just because he really needs help fixing his speed stats. Shurikens do help with his speed, they give him an extra 2 just by having a Shuriken equipped, but the speed thresholds aren't trivial to reach in Birthright. He does still need extra help, and the extra speed that he gets from Master Ninja makes it easier to get him to benchmarks.
Yeah, definitely. And once you hit those speed benchmarks, it's all about getting the damage to one-round enemies.
Yeah.
It's nice and simple with the speed buffs.
Again, going through the ninja class skills, lethality can be kind of funny, although at that point, you would probably just want to be doing a normal crit build with like a barb shuriken instead of going for lethality strats, just because your chance of getting a crit and killing is going to be higher than proccing lethality, which is 1/4 of your skill stat, which never super great.
Yeah, and although skill is Saizo's best stat, it's still not gonna be good proc rates, unfortunately.
Shuriken Fair is another skill that he really appreciates just because the Master Ninja class doesn't have the best strength compared to Mechanist, so getting the extra damage stack for basically free by staying in his best class is really nice. It does come a little late in the game, but he does really appreciate it when trying to hit benchmarks against the late game enemies that have very big HP and defense stats, especially like Berserkers and Generals, if you aren't using the Sting Shuriken, and the Wyvern Lords especially.
They can be pretty bulky. I've said before, like Great Knights are also kind of an issue because they have weapon triangle control, and you can have like no shuriken rank from that interaction. So having good damage is important.
He probably won't be spending very much time in Mechanist, although if he wants to get Golem Bane for the Stoneborn chapter in Fire Falls, it can help, although you probably have other better units at taking care of Stoneborn.
The chapter 21 boss is surprisingly bulky. Ideally, you just use like another Mechanist for the job rather than Saizo himself.
It's Birthright, you're probably going to have a bunch of Mechanists anyway, so you don't need to divert Saizo into Mechanist just to take care of that one boss. Of course, Replicate does help. I think Saizo is one of the better users of Replicate just because his big defense stats allows him to actually survive lots of combat. So having him in 2 places at once is generally a net positive because his big defense lets the sharing of the health bar be less of an issue.
It also makes it easier to heal up Saizo because you only need to heal one of the clones.
So you can offset pyrotechnics by healing with one of these Saizos and using your player phase attack with another Saizo to mitigate that skill.
Yeah, or chugging a vulnerary with one clone and then you're healthy for the other clone.
And Saizo also has probably the best secondary class you could have for Ninja, which is Samurai, just because it gives him access to Vantage, which is the best bulk boosting skill in the game, because a lot of the time against the stronger enemies like the Berserkers and Wyvern Lords, Dagger classes have a lot of trouble one-rounding, so instead they'll probably be killing them in 3 hits, and with Vantage, they will be able to hit first before the enemy on the second enemy phase, so they don't have to care about the damage that they've sustained, because Vantage will let them kill the enemies before they can hit back on the second turn. If you aren't doing enough damage to 3-shot a group of enemies, if you bank on them bringing you down to below half health during their first enemy phase, you can activate Pyrotechnics and damage them to make sure the next hit kills. This means that your Vantage hit will come before a counterattack, and they'll be dead before they damage you. But if you do the math wrong, or the enemies don't line up perfectly for Pyrotechnics to proc on everyone, well, Saizo's just gonna die, and that's not great.
I can't say I delved too much into Vantage for Saizo, I think the reclass to samurai can be a bit awkward, but it can be beneficial in the long term.
I find that reclassing to samurai isn't usually super difficult to fit in just because there are some faceless maps in the Leo chapter and Fort Dragonfall where you can just equip a samurai with a spirit katana after an arm scroll and get them the 2 levels that they need to get Vantage and get out of the class.
Yeah, the stretch of chapters 17 to 21 I'd say are pretty good for grinding out whatever skills you need.
And especially Saizo has an easy time of doing it just because he has the defense stats, which allows him to survive one-range attacks from lots of enemies when he's one-range locked himself. And he probably doesn't really need the other skills from the samurai class. Astra does help him with his survivability. It does take advantage of his high skill stats to have a high proc rate, which getting a free guard gauge with an attack is very nice. But he generally doesn't need it to survive big clusters of enemies. He's also probably not going to need to use Sword Fair or Life and Death, just because he's the bulk stacking ninja. He really wants to be taking all the hits and 2-shotting your enemies or 3-shotting them back. You don't want to hurt your survivability with Life and Death, and you probably don't want to be using swords. You'd much rather be using daggers to get the 1-2 range.
Yeah, and as stated before, like defense is such a big stat in Birthright if you're going for like a traditional Juggernaut build. So Life and Death is being effectively -10 defense and res. That's too much.
And if you're going for the funny Life and Death replicate one-shot builds, you're probably not using Saizo. That is more of Kagero's job.
True.
On Saizo particularly, don't get Life and Death. And Seal Strength generally isn't super applicable just because you're 3-shotting enemies with Vantage, so they probably won't be getting an attack on you where Seal Strength is active. He does get Samurai again through Friendship, which allows him to save the use of a Heart Seal, and it allows him to instead get to Samurai through an A+ Friendship Seal, which can help depending on what your plans are for the first 4 Heart Seals.
Oh, definitely. Heart Seals in Birthright are pretty scarce, I find. Until chapter 13, there's only 1 single Heart Seal. That's also why I like delaying until chapter 17 to 21 is my preferred choice.
Do you think he gets anything notable from the Sky Knight class?
No. I mean, Camaraderie is kind of funny, but it's only 10% heal, and he needs to be in range of allies. But other than that, it's kind of just, eh.
He probably isn't going to be the one that's using rally speed. He probably isn't going to be in range of your units to make much use of Amaterasu. And yeah, this generally doesn't really help him that much.
The darting blow should be like, oh, it would be good for Saizo because he wants speed, but it's also player phase only, so it's not that impactful. And also, warding blow is kind of funny to patch up his res, but also you may as well just use Duelist's blow instead and just dodge tank. It's not hard to get 0% hit rates from the sorcerers and other magic units in Birthright.
The one skill that might be worth grabbing is Air Superiority, which is an extra hit and avoid +30 against flying units, which really does help against the Wyvern Lords. He's not going to have very big hit issues, but being able to have an extra 30 avoid is not something to complain about, although he probably doesn't need to get Air Superiority in order to survive against Wyvern Lords. It just helps.
Kind of thinking about it, I don't really think you fight that many Wyvern Lords or Malignites even. There's chapter 23 and then chapter 24, which you can pretty much skip, and then kind of just chapter 27 for 4 enemies.
Yeah.
It's not a lot.
So he does have access to more skills through marriage, although he already has the god class line of samurai and ninja at base, so the amount that he'll get from these is probably not going to be much. Does anything stand out to you?
I kind of just wanted to add on to the Sky Knight part from Tsubaki. Bolt Naginata's Falcon Knight. It's not like as really serious build. It's just kind of like for the funnies.
It is funny, although cutting your defense to go into Sky Knight might not be the best idea.
Yeah, and facing bow effectiveness damage from like bow knights.
Yeah.
I said before I did Great Master through Sakura. That was fun.
Yeah.
I really liked Renewal for Saizo. And even though I didn't really use it, Miracle it exists in case he really needs it somehow. Renewal really helps mitigate pyrotechnics because 30% of HP at the start of your player phase. And pyrotechnics is a player phase skill, so it happens right before pyrotechnics can proc. It's kind of convenient. I really like the Diviner class line on Saizo. Again, magic build.
Ooh.
I really like going Basara, and he gets magic +2, which helps. He also gets Quixotic, which I know he does not have hit issues, but I just like Quixotic anyways.
To be honest, Quixotic probably hurts him more than it helps him just because losing a void, not always ideal in Birthright.
That is true, but I'm not the person who would be like prey on misses or that kind of stuff. So for me, there is no downside. He can also access it through Spear Fighter. He just wouldn't get magic +2, which is kind of sad. But he does get Lancebearer.
Spear Fighter is an interesting option just because Seal Defense might help. It makes it so that your thresholds for 3-shotting are a lot lower just because you get an extra +5 damage effectively on the second turn, which is nice. It can help.
It can help, yeah. I don't have any other classes that stand out for me. Aside from Corrin, I don't even know if I want to get into Corrin classes.
I mean, Corrin is generally the best partner for everyone. Corrin can just pass soul, and if you put them into a 1-2 range class, they will probably win the game with Corrin backpack, so we really don't need to talk about Corrin because Corrin is the best partner for everyone.
With all the magic builds I've been mentioning, he can instead just go Dark Knight from Corrin and then just sweep the game like that.
And of course, Oni Chieftain really takes advantage of his high defense to make him really basically unkillable against physical units at least. It lets him use 1-2 range magic, which Saizo does have one of the best magic growths in the game, so he's probably going to be better than most candidates for Oni Chieftain. And his high natural skill lets him offset the terrible class bases of Oni Chieftain a bit.
One thing I'm really critical on with Oni Chieftain is the hit rates, which I'm not a fan. And Saizo can mitigate that with just sheer skill and luck, which is amazing.
Yep. So if you want the mythical, reliable Oni Chieftain, Saizo is that guy. There is one more question. Who does Saizo end up marrying? When you think of who you want to pair up with Saizo, you probably want to think about how they benefit his speed stat, because that is the one stat that he has some trouble with in the early game, which is when you're going to be building his support with his wife. So, who do you think are some of the better options he has from this selection?
I think Oboro is one of his better ones. Spear Fighter or Spear Master gives speed, which is good for Saizo. It also gives pretty good strength as well. It helps for early game, and Oboro comes pretty early at chapter 9. You can immediately start getting supports for Saizo. If you just want to go for like a ninja build, you don't want to do anything fancy with magic, going for Archer is like a Mozu or Setsuna. Those can work, but I think the best one is Spear Fighter for sure.
I actually think his best wife is Hinoka. Hinoka does give the +3 speed, which is slightly more than Spear Fighter and Archer give, and it has the benefit of actually passing Saizo's ninja class onto a unit that really wants it, which is Hinoka, because once you get Saizo to marry Hinoka and have Hinoka reclass into Mechanist, she is probably going to be better than Saizo, stat-wise.
Interesting. I actually never have done that kind of build with Hinoka, but Hinoka's stats are also pretty darn good, so I imagine it works well.
Saizo's big benefit when it comes to marriage is his ability to pass the ninja class line, because every unit is going to want to end the game in a physical class wants the ninja class line, or apothecary class line, but that is much rarer. So the two that you want to be really selective on who to pair them with is Saizo and Kaze, just because they are able to give that class to whatever woman that wants to marry them. So yeah, In his joining map, Chapter 8, the Fuga Desert map, it doesn't really look great for him just because there's a lot of archers and Oni savages that he is going to have trouble doing much to. It doesn't help that he starts with a starting inventory that he doesn't want. You would want to trade Saizo's inventory with Kaze's, basically. But chapters 9 and 10 are some of the best maps in the game to have a ninja on. In chapter 9, he can comfortably one round the Dark Mages and Cavaliers if he has a Tonic and a Setsuna pair up. And on top of that, if you're willing to rig a meal to boost his strength and speed, he can even one round the Armor Knights with Renko pair up. If you look at the low turn count clears of chapter 9, I think some of them just send Saizo as far as possible, click end turn, and just watch him kill all the things that are in his path, which is a sight to behold.
Yeah, chapter 9 really is the chapter for Saizo. It's like his first real, I can like one round pretty much every enemy. Funnily enough, the Dragon Vein in that chapter, it also gives 4 speed, which helps Saizo.
Yep. And chapter 10 is also another very good map for ninjas, just because a lot of enemies are going to have 1-2 range because they're ninjas. So he is going to match up pretty well against ninjas if you have enough speed and attack stacking boosts. Although actually getting him those boosts is not always possible. I believe in order to one round the ninjas, he needs a Setsuna pair up or an Archer pair up. Inspiring Song, which you might not have by this point in the game. He also needs both tonics in attack and speed. And I think you also need to rig a strength and speed meal in order to reach the benchmark. And that's not even mentioning the fact that ninjas will debuff you if they have a Steel Shuriken. So if you want to one-round them even after the Steel Shuriken buffs, you also need a Forged Iron Shuriken, which is possible to get. It's not hard to get, but if you're playing without infinite resources, it's an RNG factor that you might not like.
I would say the best way to not deal with debuffs is to not let them hit you in the first place. Saizo can use Guard Stance to block the Steel Shuriken hits and only take the Iron Shuriken ones, which he does not care about. And you can also manipulate the Steel Shuriken ninjas into attacking someone else, like Tsubaki, or someone you're not using as like your main juggernaut for the chapter.
So basically just sending a unit that cannot counter a ninja in their range is going to get them to not attack Saizo. And Tsubaki is probably the best candidate for that just because he's a flyer and he can be wherever he wants. But the later chapters are not quite so convenient for Saizo. The next one is the boat map, where daggers are vastly outclassed by bows. He does have the benefit of being in a 1-2 range class, so he has a lot more opportunities to get dual strikes with effective bows, but he's not going to be the one that is dealing the damage. It's probably going to be the bow users that are dealing the biggest part of the damage.
He is able to like fight the Sky Knights by himself. Like it will take speed stacking, but it is possible. And being able to counter at 1-2 range helps with the Kinshi Knights and the Malig Knights as well. So that's great for Saizo.
And the later chapters, he generally continues to not really be your best combat units. The next one is the Opera House map, where you'd much rather be holding a bow and attacking on player phase. And Saizo is fine as a 1-2 range juggernaut there, although the enemies actually have stats in that chapter, so he won't quite as easily be one-rounding everything like he did in chapter 9.
There are like some weak enemies. There's the Cavaliers, there's the Outlaws, and one really good thing with Saizo is, again, the 1-2 range. It really helps because a lot of the enemies in that chapter have javelins and some sort of 1-2 range as well. I think it's actually good for Saizo. I mean, he probably won't be as good as like an apothecary or an archer because they can just use the boat layout to attack strictly from 2 range.
Being able to choose whether he's attacking from 1 or 2 range really does help if you're trying to make a big player phase push. If you are concerned about how the enemies are body blocking you from making a 1 range or 2 range attack that kills, Saizo's flexibility allows him to attack from wherever he wants and clear a path for more of your units to make your larger push. After that is the Chev map with Camilla and Hans. That is generally not the best map for ninjas because a lot of the enemies are 1 range locked. You probably don't need Saizo, and the ones that aren't are outlaws, which Saizo does not match up very well against. And after that, you get into the Ryoma chapter, where, again, you have effective weapons at this point to kill all the things on horses. So Saizo is definitely not your best option in killing all those things. And the chapter after that is Wolfskin Peak, which again, your lance users have effective weapons, and Saizo does not. The only other chapter that I think Saizo is a contender for one of your better units to use is chapter 16, Pleasure Palace, which again is another one of those maps where you're doing those big player face pushes, and having the flexibility to attack from 1 range or 2 range is really nice.
For that chapter too, the enemy composition, there's like a lot of mages, which fits perfectly into what Saizo wants to kill anyways, as a ninja.
His res isn't really that great.
That's true. Sorcerers can be really rough on Saizo, but the unpromoted dark mages, they're just fodder for him.
And after that, you have all the grinding maps where Saizo is just going to be pretty unremarkable. And to be honest, I really think that most of what Saizo is going to be doing up until the late game is going to be self-improvements rather than him actually being the best unit for the job. I think that some units like Obro have an easier time actually getting to level 20, just because they have maps like chapter 14 and 15, where they can just kill horses and wolfskin and get to their early promotion, while Saizo just has to keep being deployed and staying with the level curve, which he's fine. He is still going to be your like 4th or 5th best combat unit at any given situation, which is really nice, but he just doesn't stand out in any big way.
Yeah, I definitely agree. The kind of early to mid game, I would say he's not the best. If you have a mechanist like a reclassed Azama, he can just clear those maps while Saizo can't. Saizo's strength, I would say, is more going into late game, where he has those huge growths to back up his stat and all that.
So if you're going to bring Saizo into late game, he does have some stiff competition. Birthright is a game that has a lot of units that want to be doing basically exactly what Saizo's going to be doing. So let's go over a few of comparisons to some of the other high tier units in this game, starting with, of course, Ryoma. Why use Saizo if you can use Ryoma? Ryoma has, on the same level, a very big attack lead, even if I'm being generous with giving Saizo a Brass Shuriken +3, and by the time you get Ryoma, Saizo is going to be way lower level than Ryoma, so Ryoma is very good and difficult to surpass. But generally, in late game Birthrights, you're going to be using more than one carry if you're going to be going down all the paths and making sure that you don't get flanked from behind, so having a 2nd, 3rd, or 4th carry is usually pretty nice, and Saizo is pretty good at filling that role in casual play.
Yeah, I got nothing to add. He does his job well, and it's kind of impressive, his stat, even compared to just Ryoma.
The slight bulk lead is appreciated, although Ryoma's bulk is kind of deceptive in that he has more ways to fix his middling bulk, because he does have things like Vantage crits and Vantage Astra to make him cheat death in more ways than Saizo can.
So basically, Ryoma is just like the cheater, and Saizo's like the good old honest juggernaut.
And another one of your big top tier units is going to be Silas, who the big thing that he has over Saizo is the big damage stack that he gets from Vow of Friendship and Elbow Room and Stronger Post, along with the really big survivability boost that Soul gives him. Silas also has access to Ninja through Kaze Friendship, and he can get Vantage through Marriage if he wants. So Silas can eventually end up becoming just a better Saizo, but that comes with a downside of Silas requiring a lot more investment in order to get to a point where Saizo just is basically at base, and you just have to level him up and not have to spend extra seals in order to get to where Silas gets. Saizo will never reach the peaks that Silas has. He doesn't have that really high ceiling that Silas has. But with Saizo, you can just stay a ninja, maybe reclass to get Vantage with your Heart Seal, and reclass back, and not have to care about supports, and instead just propagate his ninja class line to your other units in the army that want it more.
With Saizo, he's gonna be reliant on his stats, and it can be pretty rough with Saizo if he got screwed in defense, since he's pretty reliant on just taking attacks with the defense in a traditional manner compared to someone like Silas who can just heal it all up.
Yep.
So that's one bad thing about Saizo.
And another big competition for him is Oboro, who gets Mechanist through Apothecary in her Heartseal class. And Oboro has an easier time leveling up to level 20 because she will probably get there after chapters 14 and 15. So Oboro being easier to get to level 20 and promote, and also having the really good Nor Enmity skill, which just gives her a flat +3 damage against Norians, which is kind of crazy, on top of Seal Defense, which makes her thresholds for reaching attack benchmarks less if you're 3-shotting. Oboro is a pretty solid choice, and her defenses are actually going to be higher than Saizo's, though she does have a slight speed deficit that Potent Potion does help her solve. The Apothecary class line is actually kind of insane in Birthright just because Potent Potion and Quick Salve are such good skills. Potent Potion gives an extra 50% boost to tonics and healing items, while Quick Salve lets you use a healing item and attack in the same turn. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I agree with the Apothecary skills. They're pretty great. And I'm just kind of like, imagine if Saizo had Quick Salve and Potent Potion so that he doesn't have to deal with Pyrotechnics as much. Just heal and then attack.
The big downside about Oboro is that it takes a Heart Seal to get her into Mechanist, and she also needs to spend a Marriage to get to Vantage. So that is something that Saizo has over Oboro. Saizo does have the effective bulk lead because of Vantage, but Oboro's numbers are just pretty solid, so she'll probably do just fine without Vantage. And the final top tier physical units that I want to talk about right now is Jacob. And Jacob is interesting just because he has the access to really early level 15 skills. He can get Shuriken Fair as soon as he reaches level 15, which can be as soon as like chapter 14 or 15. And just having an extra +5 damage on all attacks on top of the access to like Elbow Room and Defender that he can get through Paladin, which he has in his Heartseal class, and early access to Replicate is really crazy. If you have an equal level Jacob and Saizo, the skills really push Jacob's attack stats higher than Saizo's effective attack. Although the big downside to using Jacob is he does require Ninja Marriage in order to get to the point where he's doing things at 1-2 range with Shuriken Fair and Replicate, while Saizo just has his entire kit without having to marry for it or raise any supports at all, which does really help Saizo.
Yeah, the common trend with these kinds of comparisons is that the other unit is getting investment, and pretty big investments like S supports, and they have to reclass too with their Heart Seals too. And it's just to be like slightly better than Saizo,
Yeah.
which is saying a lot for Saizo. He gets to do all this with pretty much no investment.
And that's why we have Saizo as the baseline for all of our unit comparisons, just because Saizo can do what most units have to invest a lot for with his base class set, which is crazy. His kit is just so stacked. Even if he's not the most impressive unit throughout the course of the game, he will always just be your 5th best combat unit for any given situation. So he'll always be able to just keep up with the level curve if you continue to deploy him and let him see combat.
If you give the same kind of investment to Saizo, like let him get into marriages, he can like really wreck a lot of things. And I've been mentioning earlier with all the magic builds, it really does make Saizo a better unit.
So Saizo is comfortably one of Birthright's best units. I don't think very many people would argue him anywhere below top 10. He's a top 5 contender maybe. He is definitely up there.
I personally would put him in top 5. I think he has lots of things going for him, especially with that skill stat, the accuracy. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, anything else you have to add? Is there anything you want to plug at the end of this video?
I do have a Conquest run going currently. and it's a no guard stance, so everything is gonna be either attack stance or no one supporting them at all. So that's pretty fun. And I'm gonna have a couple videos. I think like as of the time right now, I just put out the chapter 15 video, but I expect to push out the chapter 16, 17, 18, and Ophelia Paralog pretty soon after. So that will be nice.